director of United Fruit Company, Bradley Palmer, decided that they should buy stock in their competitors as well. So for a time, United Fruit Company owned 80% of all banana trades in the United States. And as soon as they had this money, they kept expanding their operation. They bought land and built railroad across Central America into the northern part of South America. By 1900, it's hard to explain how big United Fruit was. Like, sure, there's companies that are bigger today, like Amazon, but because of the way we as the public receive information, there's so many routes around it. Whereas back in 1900, United Fruit kind of decided what their image would be, as well as even the image of the countries that they ship product from. Like, for example, they started something called the Great White Fleet, which was named after the military's Great White Fleet. These were, as the name implies, really big ships that were painted white and used to ship bananas to the United States. This Great White Fleet would take groups of 50 to 100 people and tour them around the Caribbean. This not only promoted the name of United Fruit, but also was the first example of a Caribbean cruise. And United Fruit can be credited with sparking that entire avenue of culture as well. Like in 1901, Guatemala just had them start running the bank. No joke, because United Fruit owned all of the railways and all of the infrastructure for the country, Guatemala just decided to contract them to decide where letters go. In 1913, they created the Tropical Radio and Telegraph Company, which managed all of the radio and telegraph broadcasts throughout Central America. In 1930, they were America is pretty monstrous. Not only were workers subjected to 7-day work days, and they would be paid the equivalent of like $1.30, but not even in money, in company vouchers. Say you're the Costa Rican government and you do care about what you're going through. Well, if you impose any kind of fine or serious restriction on United Fruit for the way they're treating the workers, then at any point, United Fruit can just take their ball and go home. They own the railroads, they own the radios, they own the post office. They can either charge you an exorbitant fee for using it or just not allow you to use it altogether. So unless you want the entire country to fall into poverty, you kind of have to play along. Now, this is also a very favorable look to local governments, considering a lot of these officials were also being paid off and didn't really care about the issues United Fruit was creating. But suffice to say, even if they did care, not a lot could be done. I also want to emphasize I'm kind of oversimplifying by saying that it was just United Fruit Company and ergo Chiquita Bananas that's responsible for all this, when in reality there were several large companies that were doing the same thing to different degrees in different places. Even other fruit companies, like companies that would eventually become Dole, all had a hand in this pie. I'm mainly just picking on United Fruit Company because, for one, they're one of the largest to have done it. 2, their name gets brought up the most when you're talking about these historic instances. And 3, they're the guys who, once again, have an actual guilty conviction. But just assume all circumstances in Latin America are bad at this time because they pretty much were. As a matter of fact, it was these conditions that caused the author O. Henry to coin the term Banana Republic, which effectively became a slang term for any area where a small percentage of elite commandeer a very large and abused working class in order to turn a profit or create a good, which makes it extra funny that a company decided to name their clothing brand that. I don't have anything against Banana Republic. As a matter of fact, this is one of their shirts, and it's very comfortable, but it's just so wild to me that you would hear that whole history, be like, yeah, we'll name our industry after that. Why not? Well, while all the heads of the corporation are having a great time and officials are either willingly or unwillingly turning a blind eye to what the United Fruit Company is doing, the workers are not as happy with the arrangement and begin to protest. Around this time, a nickname began to pop up for the United Fruit Company. Locals refer to it as the octopus because it has an arm in everything the country does. And in the early 1900s, a lot of worker strikes happened. You can imagine how United Fruit felt about that. Initially, it started out small with unionizers convincing one company town at a time to revolt against their working conditions. But the first really big demonstration would come in 1928. It was then in the town of Cienaga, Colombia, that a whole lot of workers decided to complain at once. When you look at what the workers of this strike were protesting, it would be comedic had it not happened to actual people. Like among their list of demands was a 6-day work week as opposed to a 7-day work week, improvement of hospital services, weekly wages, and abolition of office stores, meaning they're paid with real money instead of vouchers. The strike began on November the 12th, and it seems that rather than hearing the workers out, United Fruit Company decided to get Dad involved. Communism was not as scary to the United States as it would become post-World War II, but it was still in the minds of the American government. So United Fruit Company framed this entire operation to be a sort of communist revolution, and the United States was threatening to get involved. This caused the Colombian army to jump into action, and they immediately sent about 700 troops into the town. On December 6th of 1928, there was about 1,500 protesters camped out within the town. At one point, General Vargas gives the order to fire. It is not known exactly how many people died in the ensuing massacre. Estimates are anywhere from 47 people to 2,000. General Vargas would later say he did this to ensure the safety of Colombia as he feared an American invasion. While 47 bodies are confirmed, the reason the number may be as high as 1,000 is because of the message sent from the U.S. Embassy. From this message, we know not only that the United States knew about this, but that it was considered a great success. This event is remembered to this day as the Banana Massacre. And believe it or not, it is not the only massacre we're going to get to in this story. Well, 6 years later, the United Fruit Company gets another massive strike, and this time it's too many people to, just shoot all of them. The 1934 demonstration managed to amass over 100,000 workers across different company towns and different vocations. And most of what they were protesting for was the same thing at the Banana Massacre. They were protesting for safer working conditions, a new minimum wage. United Fruit Company tries to do the same thing they did at the Banana Massacre. They say that it is a communist takeover. They begin deporting a lot of people, but in a few weeks they give up. This 1934 protest is forever known as the Great Banana Strike. The protest began on August the 9th and ended on August the 28th, with United Fruit Company saying they would agree to the demand. However, as soon as the mob has dissipated, the United Fruit Company simply doesn't do that. Despite saying they'd agreed to the demands, and the government even enacting some new laws around workers' rights, United Fruit Company just doesn't do anything. And when another strike begins to start up, this time they've identified all of the strike leaders, and they are all either imprisoned or disappear. And by this time in the 1930s, the United Fruit Company owns 3.5 million acres of land in Central America. And in places like Guatemala, they're the majority landowner. In Guatemala specifically, they own about 20% of all the land, meaning you can just look at a picture of Guatemala and point at it, and there is a 1 in 5 chance that you're pointing at United Fruit Company land. So for several years, this just continued. The United Fruit Company had the market cornered, and anytime the workers had something to say about it, the resistance quickly fizzled out. Every now and then, a country would try to enact new labor laws and either just fine United Fruit Company, or United Fruit Company would counter them with being targeted. Like, for example, when a law would come that would apply to companies with over 500 workers, they would argue that they're the only people in the area with over 500 workers, so it's targeted harassment. It was in 1944 that the Chiquita brand would come to exist, the Chiquita name applying specifically to their bananas. The mascot for this Chiquita banana being a banana woman with a bowl of fruit on her head, as well as a catchy jingle that played in my head every time I read about a new massacre. The next big event in this entire story would happen in 1952, and the set piece for one of the wildest things United Fruit Company would ever do, as well as the CIA, is Guatemala. See, in the previous couple years, a lot of worker strikes had started at United Fruit Company properties in Guatemala. The things they were striking for are once again absurd and also sad, like $1.50 wage per day, or allowance for funerals when workers die in accidents, or compensation for families when workers die in accidents. Like that, what an insane place to be in, where you're begging not to not die at work, just to not also go broke when you die at work. Well, it was around this time that Guatemala just got democracy, and one of the first presidents they elect, Pablo Arbenz, founder of the Guatemalan Party of Labor. Now, Arbenz has a lot of dangerous things like